that scene where Drop Dead Fred is like just mesmerised by this woman's fanny.
Yes.
Because he's just like...
Welcome to Psychocinematic, a podcast where we analyse depictions of mental illness and disability in popular films and TV. I'm your host, Stephanie Fornasia. If you love our podcast and want to give us some support, make sure you're following Psychocinematic Podcast on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter. And check out our website, psychocinematicpodcast.com. For access to special bonus content, episodes, early access, stickers, and contribute to our regular fundraisers, join our Patreon. Starting from $3.50 a month, you can be the coolest psychocinematic listener there is. I'll start today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we record this podcast on today, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners and their elders past, present and future. And I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Aboriginal land, stolen land, and that sovereignty was never ceded. And I'd like to welcome to the podcast today Ariadne.
Hi.
So, Ariadne, we're new friends.
Yeah.
You've lived in Melbourne like for about a year now, is that right?
Yeah, it's just over a year. I came down in November 2021 and I'm still kind of finding my bearings around the city. I'm kind of discovering new parts of Melbourne every day.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, it's still kind of unfolding before me.
And you came from Brisbane?
I did come from Brisbane.
Which is where Michael and I are from as well. So there's definitely a bit of an inside joke amongst Brisbane expats to Melbourne that they find each other and constantly do. Because I know you through other friends who we met in Melbourne who were from Brisbane as well.
Yes. So, yeah, it's just like this Brisbane colony that sort of like came down.
All the cool people from Brisbane.
Yes.
What brought you to Melbourne?
I really wanted to change. So I love Brisbane a lot. There's so much that I appreciated about it. But after living there for 40 years, I felt like I'd really, like that was it. I'd kind of wrung it dry and I just couldn't see my life kind of going forward in any way. And so I thought, well, I need like a change. I mean, there's a lot that I still need to explore about Melbourne, but we're in Dame Edna's heartland.
Yes, exactly, which is very Melbourne, very Australian.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing that I did discover about Melbourne is that I finally understood what Dame Edna was on about whenever the fuck she would go on about, like mini ponds and, you know, just like that very kind of, that suburbanite who like thinks she's above.
I kind of understand also like Kath and Kim.
Yes.
Like Fountain Gate. Like
the accent, like the Prue and True accent.
Yes. It's very Melbourne.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into what we're talking about today. We're covering the movie Drop Dead Fred, which was a very early 90s film released in 1991.
Yeah.
And it's something that you suggested, Ariadne.
Yes.
What made you decide that this would be a good film to cover?
I came up with a list and then Drop Dead Fred came up. I think because, you know, it was about a woman grappling with her imaginary friend. And I hadn't seen Drop Dead Fred since I was a kid. So a lot of it I had forgotten. Like I did not realise when I saw it how much of a kid's film it wasn't.
Yeah.
And so I just thought it would be interesting. I thought, well, I really like Rik Mayall. I loved him in the Young Ones. That would be a fun movie to talk about. Nothing deeper than that. And then on like viewing it again, I was like, wow, there's all this stuff in the movie that's actually like really kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But the film is so fucked, like in so many ways.
Yeah, it's so strange because it's not a kid's film, but it's not an adult's film.
No.
There's discussions of like sex, not just that it exists, but like, you know, her friend Janie is like stooping her.
And there's that scene where Drop Dead Fred is like just mesmerised by this woman's fanny.
Yes.
Because he's just like...
And it's that sort of cartoonish response. Like that's not appropriate for kids, but then at the same time, who is it for? Because it's not for adults.
No. Well, because I rewatched it this morning and I thought maybe it works if you view it as an adult's film about childhood.
Yes, that's a good point.
Because when I saw it again, after I made the suggestion that we talk about it, the first, I think, like half an hour or 20 minutes are just so dry.
Yeah.
And I just thought, what child would be entertained
Exactly.
by this?
Like leaving her husband for another woman.
Getting
and going
fired from her job.
Yes. But I watched it like you as a kid quite often. And I'm also like, how did I even get access? Like, why did they let me watch this?
Yeah.
And who was like, hey, Steph, this looks like a good film to watch. But obviously it was marketed. It must have been marketed towards kids because we all watched it as kids.
Yeah. I think maybe the marketing people got this movie and were like, I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah.
Let's just market it towards kids.
Well, apparently, originally Tim Burton and Robin Williams were going to direct and then star in it, but they declined it. And then they were trying to find someone to direct it. And this director from Denmark, I think, H. de Jong, I don't know how to say his name, ended up doing it and made it into what it was. But then they dropped it because it was too much for them. And they ended up giving it to another distributor because they were like, no, this isn't the movie that we wanted. Yeah. And they were trying to bank off like Freddy Krueger and Beetlejuice and those kind of films that had just come out. Like, let's make this crazy, kooky character. It's going to be like sequel potential. But it just didn't end up that way. At all.
It's kind of, when I was thinking about it, I thought this could just be said about any terrible movie. It would have been so much better with a better script. Like,
yes.
If they'd kind of decided on the tone of it. It's like they're just going for this middle path. And it's like if they'd thought, okay, let's just make an adults movie, it would have been funnier.
Yeah.
I think, like it would have made a lot more sense. Because there's all of this, like, really deep stuff in it. Like, her mum is so, like, incredibly repressed.
Yeah,
And there's just, they could have explored so much more had it just been, like, an adult's film instead of, like, it looks like one of those movies where the studio got involved and were like, take this out, get rid of all the swear words.
Add more slapstick, lots of slapstick, more mud pies,
But it would have been, like, because it's not, I don't think this is a topic that's actually explored a lot, like a woman.
Especially not at that time.
No, not at all. And it's like she's going through some very intense stuff. She has this really awful infatuation with this awful guy, and I feel like something a lot of women would be able to relate to.
Yes, hugely.
And it kind of speaks to that, to a person who's had their sense of self completely quashed as a child. You're just like looking for love and nurturing from someone.
Yeah, and validation.
And then the mum is just this totally, she is really repressed. She's getting zero help from her husband.
Yeah, he's just checked out.
He's totally checked out, and she's meant to be the villain. And it's like, this guy is doing nothing.
That's one of my problems with this film because, the mum is awful. But she gets called, like, mega bitch and beast, and Dad gets nothing.
He gets completely let off the hook. Like, he does no parenting. And we're just meant to go, oh, my God. He's like, this dude, you're meant to view him as the good guy.
Yeah.
When he just walks out.
He abandons them.
He abandons the family, never to be heard from ever again. And he's meant to be seen as a good parent, and he does no parenting.
It's very characteristic of the way they treat mum.
Yes. Yeah.
Caricaturistic, sorry.
But also characteristic of just how mothers were viewed for a long
that's
time.
True.
Like, dads could do whatever the fuck they wanted. They could be abusive. They could be checked out. But because they were men, they could do all of this.
They had no responsibilities.
No.
Yeah.
And women were meant to do everything. And in the mother's defense, I will say Fred is a nightmare. He's the worst person. Like, I mean, he's just fucking off the chain. And
I think that's where it gets uncomfortable with this movie because he goes too far. Like,
yes.
Like, we do end up seeing why Fred was valuable for Lizzie and he does help her. And that's, I guess, a good message in the film is that, sometimes you need to have an imaginary friend to help you out of a sticky life situation or whatever you need. But he just takes it to an inappropriate level, which is another thing that I think people were afraid of with this movie is that kids would start being like Fred. But I don't think there was a wave of kids acting like Rik Mayall in this movie. Because I think even kids were like, oh, no, that's too far.
Yeah.
They break into their own house and out of, that's
and
wild behaviour.
Yes. And he causes Janie, played by Carrie Fisher, the best friend, who I have to say is an incredible best friend.
Yes, she's amazing.
So he causes her houseboat, what does she call it? Like a water condominium or something.
She's amazing.
To sing. And Janie's just like, still her friend.
Yes, I don't know how she could.
I know. Like,
my entire house and everything I own is now in the water.
Yeah.
But it's cool.
Yeah, he like causes that to sink. And when he does stuff like that, you're like, how? You're a difficult guy to like.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's funny though, I find Rik Mayall weirdly attractive in this film.
He is very attractive in this film.
What does that say about us?
Well, he's an offbeat guy and that's very cute.
It is. So Elizabeth, played by Phoebe Cates, her world has been turned upside down. Her marriage to Charles, played by Tim Matheson. The only thing I remember him from is the Brady Bunch movie, I think part 2.
I think he was also in the First Wives Club.
Oh, yeah, that's right, one of the husbands.
Yeah.
So her marriage is over to him after following her discovery that he has cheated on her, but she simply can't stop loving him. Despite the support of her friend Janie, Carrie Fisher, she's unhappy. In her misery, her imaginary childhood friend, Fred, played by Rik Mayall, reappears, having been previously locked away from her. His sole purpose is to cheer Elizabeth up, although things do not quite go to plan. Elizabeth is staying with her mother, Marcia Mason, who's quite cold to Elizabeth and intends to put Elizabeth back with Charles, but in the meantime makes her into a younger double of herself. So many layers to that. Elizabeth works to get Charles back into her life, even turning up at a party with Fred, despite part of Elizabeth being overjoyed at seeing Fred again and remembering their fun, carefree times together. All he ever seems to do for Elizabeth is cause trouble. After a certain number of unforgivable actions, as we described earlier, Elizabeth's mother takes her to, quote-unquote, get help and rid her of Fred forever. So she takes her to the psychiatrist who gives her these little green pills. Elizabeth returns to Charles and starts taking the medication to rid herself of Fred. It's only when taking the last pill that she realises that Charles hasn't changed at all and that Fred is really the only person that she can trust. When she follows him into a dreamlike world, she gets the chance to overcome her greatest fears. Her mother, Charles' infidelity, and the little girl inside dealing with loneliness. Unfortunately, the only way she can truly rid herself of the fears is to lose Fred for good by realising she doesn't need him any longer. So that's the movie. It's one of Phoebe Cates' last roles before she kind of disappeared, and she was pretty big. And I also read that Russell Brand was going to star in a remake.
Oh,
thank God that didn't happen. So that's dead in the ground, thank God. I thought before we continue with some of the plot, we could talk about some of the lived experience as part of our usual. There isn't a lot out there, though, to be fair. For example, Phoebe Cates is married to Kevin Kline. That's part of the reason, apparently, why she disappeared off the screen is they were going to take turns to work while looking after their kids, but she never really took her turn. Which I call bullshit.
Well, she opened up a shop, She went from acting to retail.
There you go.
So good for her.
And it seems that she just wanted to be with the kids, which is fine and wonderful, but I'm assuming there were some gender roles played out there.
But she was really great. Like, she was great in Gremlins.
Yeah. Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
But then, I don't know, like, acting is so... like such a brutal industry.
Yeah.
Maybe she felt like...
it was too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And especially if they were trying to, like, even it up, but she wanted to stay with looking after the kids, then obviously she's like, ugh, too hard work. Yeah. And maybe she's already in that sort of routine with her kids. Her son has type 1 diabetes, which is interesting for the podcast because Michael has type 1 diabetes. And he was in The Squid and the Whale. He was a little...
oh, the one who, like, rubbed cum all over the books.
That's the one. In the library and stuff. And her daughter is the musician known as Frankie Cosmos.
I have never heard Frankie Cosmos.
Neither have I, but I've heard the name. But there you go. Famous family. Rik Mayall. There wasn't a lot about his mental health? He seemed like a fairly, I don't know, do you know much about him?
Not a huge amount, but he was always one of those personalities who was always there. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like I definitely heard of the Young Ones before I saw Drop Dead Fred. And that, I guess that was one of the thing that appealed to me, was like, oh, that's Rik from the Young Ones.
Yeah.
And I think that's also how they marketed it, was like, oh, well, you know, everyone knows Rik. He's this crazy guy. So
They'll definitely, love this movie.
yeah.
Yeah, I actually watched The Young Ones later, much later than Drop Dead Fred. So it was like, that's Drop Dead Fred.
I did like a really shallow research this morning and looked at his wiki page, and there was this quote from Spike Milligan where Spike Milligan said he's the arsehole of British comedy. Because he was going on about how, he just thinks, you know, rubbing snot on furniture is funny and farts and all that, and which is basically Drop Dead Fred.
Yeah, he was pretty perfect for that role.
Yes.
In that way.
Yeah.
He sees himself in that sort of extreme character from what I read.
Yeah.
There was this quote from him saying that I've always tended toward extremism. As I see it, there's mainstream comedy and then there's me out in the Badlands. I still feel dangerous and I still feel like I'm breaking new ground. I suppose I like being in control of what I do. I've always had a problem with doing what I'm told. So kind of similar character.
Yes. Yeah. Very sort of juvenile and like reveling in it.
Yeah.
And just kind of like, I guess he's like one of those comedians who like to sort of kind of poke fun in any sort of seriousness.
Yeah. And push the boundaries of what's acceptable as well and appropriate, which I guess was kind of the Young Ones as well.
Yes.
Yeah. But I didn't really hear anything more about whether he related to the story and mental health or whether he had his own imaginary friend or anything like that. So Marsha Mason, I didn't read much about her, apart from that she was twice divorced by then and did not have kids. So she probably relates to being a divorcee. The little girl who played Little Lizzie was played by Ashley Peldon, who I think you told me this.
Yeah. She went on to study psychology.
Yeah.
Which is very interesting. I feel like I'd seen her in a lot of things.
She's got a very distinctive look. Yeah, she's very cute. She was in something called Child of Rage, which I think is maybe I remember watching this YouTube documentary about a little girl who had schizophrenia, I think, and it looks like maybe it was a dramatization of that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And that led her to get interested in child psychology. And on her Wikipedia it says she specialises in rage screaming, which sounds interesting.
Is that just like primal scream?
Maybe. I don't know. I didn't go any further into it because I'm like, I don't know. I don't know.
They didn't teach you that at uni?
I don't think so. But yeah, that's super interesting that she went from being a child star in these like psychological movies to becoming a psychologist.
Yeah.
Now, Carrie Fisher has famously lots of lived experience.
Yes.
Do you know much about Carrie?
Yeah, I love Carrie Fisher. I guess, you know, like any child of the 80s, grew up watching Star Wars, and Carrie Fisher's always just been like this great personality, and she's so articulate about her struggles. She just had this very warm, generous personality.
Yeah. I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, I will admit, but I love Carrie Fisher.
Yeah.
I haven't read or seen Postcards from the Edge, but that was the autobiography she wrote about her life living with Debbie Reynolds, her mum, and both of their struggles with alcoholism and very mother-daughter relationship issues.
Yeah.
So definitely very relatable to what we see on this movie. And it was made into a movie with Meryl Streep and
Shirley MacLaine.
Shirley MacLaine, yes. Have you seen it?
I've seen bits of it. It came out when I was a kid, and it just struck me as one of those adult movies.
Yeah. You're like, no, not for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of childhood trauma, dealt with alcoholism. She was diagnosed with bipolar as well. So she's a very big advocate she was a very big advocate for mental health awareness. Rest in peace, Carrie. And yeah, I love her character.
Oh, Janie's.
She's like the best friend you ever wanted.
Yes, yeah.
I think that's what I really love about this movie is her character. She's like sex positive. She's supportive to her friend who she doesn't need to be. Like, she completely validates what's going on for Lizzie.
And she's so supportive. Like, after Lizzie does all the, like, completely ruins her life, she's like, oh, she's going through a very hard time right now.
Yeah, exactly. And she's just there for her.
Yeah.
And she also kind of wins at the end of the day because she gets a big payout.
Yes, that's right. In this great scene where she's, like, power walking and smoking at the same time. Yeah.
Like, that's the 80s woman you want to be, kind of thing. Yeah, she's amazing. Like, I don't know if by making this film they were like, we're going to really bring childhood trauma to the front.
Yeah, I don't think it was that deep
was.
with them.
No.
I think they were just, I mean, maybe like the original script writer was like, this is the area I want to explore. And then just going through, like, the movie making machine, that all just got diluted. Yeah. And it just became this whatever the fuck it is.
Trying to be like a Tim Burton thing.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
It's like, it never finds itself.
Yes.
And there's, like, glimpses of it, but it's just never allowed to sort of, like, really, you know, it has Arrested Development, this movie.
Yes. That's exactly true.
Yeah.
It's still a child. It needs to be more fleshed out.
Yes.
So the next criteria is around the accuracy of this movie, which is silly that we're really, because it's such a over-the-top movie.
Yeah.
But I guess the questions I would like to discuss is were we a psychologist in the room with Lizzie, not that psychiatrist who just gives her pills.
Yeah, and then just talks to the mum.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Which is, we'll get to that. What we might diagnose Lizzie with. You know, what were your thoughts while watching the movie?
I guess I'd diagnose her with just needing to really find her self-confidence.
Yeah.
Admittedly, not being a psychologist, I don't know what I would call that. But it's just like she has... And I mean, like, I've been there. I've definitely been in that position of just wanting this awful man to just, like, take me and love me when they're awful.
They're not
and
capable of that.
And why would you want that? And you just kind of want to say to her, because, like, when I was rewatching it this morning, the scenes with Charles were physically hard for me to watch because he's so gross.
And he's so patronising when he talks to her.
Yeah, but he's just, like, foul, and it was like I couldn't watch. Like, I was watching some kind of, like, horror movie, and it was just like, ugh. Yeah, like, she's really dominated by everyone around her except for Jamie. Yeah. But, like, her mum just wants to control her. Charles just wants, like...
What he wants, really.
Yeah. He just wants to have... Okay, I'll give you some attention now. Go away. Yeah. Yeah, like that's
he treats her like a child.
Yeah.
But a bad parent.
Yes. Yeah. You know, like, she also dresses... I suppose she dresses quite fashionably for you know, like, that late 80s, early 90s. She has those kind of Laura Ashley, very prim and proper. Yeah. But the movie's kind of saying, look at this child woman.
Yeah, she still dresses in pretty things.
Yeah.
And her room is still, like, exactly the way it was when she was a kid, which is all pink and frilly.
And then when you see her place, it's just like what Charles would like. Yeah. Like, there's pictures of fucking jaguars on the wall and...
It's all that sort of, like, the Beetlejuice house that Catherine O'Hara comes and changes everything into.
Like the yuppie office worker version of that,
Yeah, so it's like she's stuck in that Arrested Development for when she was a child, like you say. I had a little bit of a thing. I didn't do too much, like, cross the DSM stuff because I don't think it's really warranted. But I guess looking at it from the fact that she's seeing this imaginary friend, you know, because I did a little bit of looking at Reddit and what people thought, and they're like, oh, she's got schizophrenia. And I'm like, no, I don't think she does. She doesn't really meet the criteria for me. But she definitely is having, like, if Fred doesn't exist and he's just a figment of her imagination, which I don't think is the premise of the film.
No.
Especially as she's, like, pouring water that he's holding and stuff like that.
My God, he's so awful.
So mean to her.
Yes. It's like, what is his problem? Like, what, if you were diagnosing Fred, what would you diagnose him with?
Oh, like oppositional defiant disorder.
Okay.
He's the kid that just wants to do the opposite of what you want them to do. Definitely. But, like, he's such a caricature of that. because I sort of see Fred as the same age as what she was. Like, even though he's an adult, like he's got that brain of a 5-year-old. So that's why it all, you know, these things make sense to him, which are absolutely nonsensical. And like, don't put anything on the carpet. I'm going to put poo on the carpet. Like that's, that's something my 2-year-old would say.
Yeah. But would he do it?
No.
Yeah.
But, you know, if he didn't exist, then she could be seen as having some sort of psychosis with visual hallucinations. But I kind of see Fred, obviously he's real in the film. Well, I think he is. I see him as like a symbol of her, rather than actual being like her inner child and her inner joy and fun and the things that make life living and playfulness, of being a kid and playing, because it looks like her mum had none of that.
Yes.
So she had to create that. And I think you might have said this as well. Fred is British and male, and her dad was British.
Yeah.
So he's kind of like a step-in father figure as well at the same time for her.
Yeah, also a really terrible father figure.
Yes, just like her dad was, but in a different way.
Yeah, because I suppose she does get all that nurturing from Fred. You know, like there's that scene where she says to her mum, well, you know, Fred loves me. And then he appears and he's like, well, you're wrong, you know, like I don't love you because love is for girls and girls are disgusting.
Yeah, it's very, not very good. There's no feminist things in this film, apart from Carrie Fisher's character.
Absolutely not. It's just, well, it's very much of its time.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, he's really like a partner in crime.
Yes, yeah.
And he lets her be, you know, he really lets like her wildest fantasies come out. I guess like one thing I've been thinking about whilst we've been having this conversation is, do adults have imaginary friends?
That's a really good question. And
like, do we, but we're too embarrassed to kind of admit to it?
yeah, that's a call out to our podcast listeners, because I haven't looked into this. Do you have an imaginary friend?
Because what is the fantasy life of adults? Like the fantasy life of children is so valid.
And rich.
Yes.
Yeah.
But as adults, we're meant to grow out of all of that. We're meant to just be, you know, these little robots that go to work, we pay our tax, we fucking just, you know, whatever. You know, that sort of really sort of wild creative imagination isn't...
It's kind of, it peters out.
Yeah.
Like it's not given the room to be there.
Yeah, and like, do we create imaginary friends for ourselves?
Yeah. I guess too, like I talk to myself all the time, and many
Everyone
of us do.
does.
And personify that, perhaps. Like I'm talking to my silly self, or I'm talking to...
You know, or your pet.
Yeah. We very much I can't say that word. Never mind. We make our pets into humans, very much so. So it's maybe that's the level of us doing that. Or is it more just daydreaming about the life that we that we want? But it's a good question, because I feel like the other question mark that came up when I was looking at what people thought was like, does she have dissociative identity disorder? And she's, you know, because Fred is really a part of herself that was missing. And that she's manifested in her childhood to deal with having such a repressive, abusive mother. When you look at that, it sort of makes sense, but it doesn't fit the criteria, because you're unlikely to just have one personality, and this is not that movie. Like I don't think that's what's going on.
No.
But I guess people who live with dissociative identity disorder, you know, had that imaginary friend occurring through their personality, but became more than just a childhood sort of normal sort of commonplace trait that happens. So you could kind of look at it that way, because it's very common for kids to have imaginary friends. There's nothing pathological about it.
Yeah.
Did you have an imaginary friend?
I don't remember. I don't think I had an imaginary friend that I made up, but I definitely kind of had like friends from characters of TV shows that I would watch or films. You know, I desperately wanted Care Bears to be real as a child. So I think I created kind of fantasy worlds with TV characters or books or... Yeah. Like
in your playtime, in your bedroom, things like that.
Yeah.
That's definitely what I used to do. I used to like role play movies and things like that, like with characters as well. I think maybe I had tried to sort of have a consistent imaginary friend at one point, but it got too much work to maintain. Because I remember watching or reading Anne of Green Gables, and she had an imaginary friend who was in the mirror.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I'll do that. But yeah, I'd forget about it after a week or so.
Yes, yeah.
It wasn't anything consistent for me.
One thing I wanted to ask was, there is this one really great part where she has like this dream sequence and she lets her childhood self free.
Yes, I love that bit.
Yes, that's like
so sweet.
That is the best bit in the movie. Apart from when she kisses Fred, I thought if it had just been like a kiss on the cheek, that would make sense and be really sweet. But then it's like this kiss on the lips and it's like, what is their relationship?
It's a little bit creepy knowing that.
It's not even this kind of ambiguity that the filmmakers have tried to foster. It's just like this, that's not who they are.
And he's her. So it's, I don't know. Yeah. Like I don't think it was meant to be creepy. Like I think it was meant to be innocent. But it just comes off a bit creepy.
Yeah.
Knowing that he is obviously a fully grown man and she was like the inner child, like actually a 5-year-old when they were first, like he stayed the same age and she was 5 or 6.
Yeah.
That makes it creepy to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm trying not to read too much into it because I don't think they did.
No, not at all.
Like I think it's like a parting kiss.
Like a gift to each other.
Yeah, but that I love myself almost. I'm allowed to nurture this part of myself. But then, him as Fred can now disappear because she's integrating almost. But I don't think it needed to be a kiss. No. Yeah, on the lips.
No. But yeah, in that sequence when she lets her childhood self free and then they hug and it's really sweet. Do you really buy into like the inner child stuff? What is that about? Like how would one heal their inner child? Because I don't know much about this.
Well, I guess that's one thing that I think draws me to thinking that this film's actually not too bad is that it really does give a very weird look at childhood trauma and feeling like your inner child was repressed and how to sort of cope with that in a way to allow you to move on. Because I sort of saw her, because of the way she was repressed by her mum, who locks Fred away into a music box until she discovers him again. So for most of, like from 6 onwards, she was pretty much at the mercy of her mum and wasn't allowed to be fun, wasn't allowed to be a kid. It was just whatever mum wanted to do. And then being able to go back to her child and sort of release that joy because she became this, like to me, like a dependent personality disorder sort of adult who depended on other people for validation for pretty much everything, who didn't give it to her. Like she was still seeking out relationships from the wrong places because Charles was awful, but obviously made her feel like she needed him and that her only way to be happy was to be with people. And she says to Fred, like right at the end, I'm just so afraid of being alone. Like she's just been lonely her whole life and she's trying to get people in, make connections in the wrong places. So for her to move on from that, she kind of needed to heal that 6-year-old self. I quite like inner child mentality stuff. I'm not a psychodynamic therapist and I don't sort of use it in that sense. I kind of see it more in that more narrative psychology kind of way of doing narrative therapy of like, think of yourself as a child and what would you say to them and what did they need when they're anxious in that moment? How can you give them what they need now? Because your inner child's still in there. Yeah. And I feel like when someone is at the most vulnerable state, it's kind of that inner child coming out. So it's trying to nurture that child again. But essentially, I think the film explores that quite well. But in reality, I think that healing of trauma and that inner child takes a lot more than just one dream sequence to achieve. I think one of the things I dislike about this film is its treatment of the medical system as a whole and the psychiatrist who's just like,
he's like
here's
a
some
villain.
drugs. Yeah, exactly. And very much treated as a villain by all the wonderful, whimsical childhood imaginary friends, which was a kind of fun scene, but also a bit weird. It would have been nice to see, and this was the early 90s, so we weren't going to see this, but it would have been nice to see Lizzie actually access some actual therapy to deal with everything that's happened to her.
Yeah, because she is going through a lot. I mean, I know it's just a movie, but I really hated at the beginning when she goes into work and she's a court
typist?
A court typist, yeah. And she's like explaining to the judge, oh, you know, I'm so sorry. I like got dumped by my husband. My car got broken into. And then the cunt fires her.
I know.
I was like, it's a movie, but like, why?
That's not what. And also, who's going to do the court typing for her now?
I know, exactly.
Like, stupid idea.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what they were sort of setting that up. Like, it's like she's oblivious. Like, she doesn't notice her car get broken into and then stolen.
Yeah. And it's like, who doesn't take change into the payphone?
Or just their wallet in general.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure whether that was implying that she's a very forgetful, dippy sort of person. But I think maybe it's just showing that she's really not an adult. She's not adulting. She's still stuck as being a kid. She can't take responsibility for her things and can't even hold down her job.
No, she's so obsessed with Charles.
Yes.
With just like obtaining Charles's love.
Yeah.
Which would have been really awful. Like he's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why I think like dependent personality just sort of kind of fits that vibe for me if I was to diagnose her as an adult.
Yeah.
There's also maybe some suggestions that like she could have some I think she definitely has some complex trauma. She would definitely meet the criteria for that, I think. Often that can look like borderline personality disorder as well, where there's often that abusive, neglectful childhood in the background, because it's also like she doesn't know who she is if she's not with someone.
No, exactly, yes.
Yeah, and some of those, I guess Fred is maybe a manifestation of some of the extreme behaviours that come sometimes from borderline personality disorder, of that sort of reckless behaviour, because Fred is reckless.
Well, would you say Mickey Buns has borderline personality disorder?
Possibly.
So Mickey...
I'm not sure about him, to be honest.
I know. For those who haven't seen the film, Mickey is Elizabeth's childhood friend. And there's this scene in the restaurant where Fred is terrorising Elizabeth and forcing her to like chuck food all around the restaurant. And Mickey's like, oh my God, this is amazing. So he
Let's
starts...
just throw our food.
Yeah, he thinks
I think he's got a bit of a delusion going on.
Yeah.
Like, no, this isn't normal. Like, you should be concerned.
Yes, yeah. Because he also seems very on another planet.
And interesting with that too is that at the end of the movie, Fred is now attached to his little girl. Yeah. That's a big red flag, because Fred was attached to Lizzie because she needed someone to cope with having a neglectful, traumatic childhood. So is Mickey Bunce's daughter having a very traumatic childhood.
Yeah.
And
what's going on, Mickey?
Yeah. Why does she need Fred? What's going on? Obviously the nanny was there, but like, nanny's a pretty short term. What's going on in her life that she needs Fred?
Yeah.
Like maybe, Mickey, you need to look at yourself. Rather than chasing down Lizzie, focus on your little girl.
I would have loved to have seen a sequel where Fred was in therapy.
Yeah. That would have been interesting.
Yeah. But they could, like, the whole movie could have been like a psychologist who was a therapist to childhood friends.
Yeah. That would be an awesome job.
That would be.
I could do that job. Actually, on that note too, I think that, you know, because I've worked with a lot of kids who would be like Lizzie. Like I've worked with kids with trauma backgrounds who are exhibiting a lot of external behaviour, who have been diagnosed with things like oppositional defiant disorder. And I think if Lizzie as a child went to a psychologist or psychiatrist, might be one of the diagnosed, particularly in 1991, although I don't know how common that diagnosis was then, but maybe she'd be given an ADHD label or something like that around her behaviour.
Yeah.
And what we know about trauma is that it can manifest in kids in ways like what we see with Lizzie. And I think little Lizzie had no control over her life. She was supposed to do exactly what her mum wanted. She wasn't allowed to have fun. She wasn't, you know, the way that the house is set up in the movie is so like
perfect.
Not for kids.
No.
So she wasn't allowed to be a child. And then her father abandons her as well, and he's not really there. So she's stuck. She's completely stuck. She's completely got no sense of control or autonomy in her life. She's not even allowed to have fun.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that these extreme behaviours come, whether they're through Fred or as a kid, to try and regain some control and regain some attention, because her mum doesn't really pay attention to her or her needs.
Yeah.
So it's like the extreme behaviour, like, this is the only way I can get your attention and focus on me. It's really sad to me when mum locks up Fred that she just goes ahead and cleans the mess that she made. It's like, well, that's not going to work anymore. I can't do it anymore, so I've just got to do what mum says. Like, it's so heartbreaking.
It is. She's so kind of like small and vulnerable, and she's trying. It doesn't help that Fred comes along and makes everything worse for her.
No, exactly. So, like, it's that sort of too extreme level of behaviour.
Yeah. So what are the parents like when you are working with these children? Do you talk with the parent?
Yes. There's, I mean, it's been a while since I've been in that position because now I'm working in a more corporate role. But the parents are the actual client in the room, essentially. Oh, okay. And it's giving them some strategies to help with those situations. But often a lot of them have their own intergenerational trauma as well. Like they have their own trauma in general. Their childhood trauma was also around parenting as well and not given the unconditional love from their parents. So, and not being given the skills to know how to parent as well. Yeah. So a lot of the parents I've worked with don't intend for this to be the situation that they're in, but they don't have any other skills in which to do it. So it's really working with them, but also developing rapport, firstly with the parents to be able to do that, because there's either one of two ways that they might have been approached before in this situation is their kids are the problem, but nothing gets fixed because they need to be parented. There's nothing they can do to fix this. Or the parent is blamed. Yeah. And then that's the only message that they get from that. So it's really working with the parents as well, using some more relationship strategies. So giving them some of the tools to express emotions for themselves and then help their kids express those emotions, giving them strategies to know what to do instead, and also just creating a calm environment so that there is safety in that as well. The problem is with a lot of parents like this, I've had conversations with a few people around this, is some of these families are actually not in a very stable financial position. They might already be around domestic violence as well that they can't move out of. Mum's got her own mental health issues which aren't being addressed because they don't have enough money or they don't have the support around them or the family support. And without all of those things in place, it's very hard to make gains. So, you know, there's so much that a psychologist can do to support a child who's acting out because there's trauma and there's some relationship breakdown with their parents. But there's also so much that the government needs to do to support these families so that can happen.
Yes, it's quite frustrating that, I don't know, that so much gets chucked at like big business to fucking blow up the country, and then, you know, health just languishes.
Exactly, and we'll just cut what we've already given, like this Medicare sessions, and also never increase the Medicare rebate. You know, this is even if the parent gets in the door to see a psychologist about their kid, which is a huge feat in itself as well.
Well, because I could imagine so many parents would not have the self-awareness to kind of go, okay, well, what is my part in the problem?
That's a big part as well, especially if they've been raised the same way. Then they might think this is the way it's supposed to be. What's going wrong here? My kid has a behaviour problem. And that's where it stays. I feel like with the world today, there's a little bit more, even from when I was in private practice, there's a lot more understanding now. Like there's a lot of media that's been released, even like kids' movies around childhood trauma and intergenerational trauma and things like that, that's becoming a little bit more known. But there still needs to be more supports, particularly for women, to escape these situations and to be able to be in a place where they can heal themselves and then help parent in a way that's healthy for both them and their child. It's so convoluted. But, you know, I do like that even in 1991, that was a theme in this strange film.
It's a great movie for tackling this subject, even if it's tackled in a sort of juvenile way. And
I guess on that topic too, Lizzie's mum, I don't even know if she has a name apart from Mega Beast. Or the bitch.
The mega bitch.
Do you have any ideas of what you think she might be diagnosed with or what she could be experiencing?
Well, I wonder how much of it is being a woman of her time. Because you do see these flashbacks to Lizzie's childhood, which are meant to be from like the 60s. And everything is very, you know, her mum looks perfect, put together. And that's just what was expected of women.
Yeah.
And, you know, you do see this. It's just like you get a man, that is it.
Yeah.
Just get...
that is the pinnacle of success as a woman.
That's what you're here for. He is there to support you. Because I think, maybe she's very repressed. But it's also just like she is just living in the confines. She doesn't think outside of the confines of that.
And that societal expectation that she's grown up in, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it, you know, destroys her personality. Like, she's just geared towards the male gaze in terms of how she dresses, in terms of how she wants Lizzie to view herself.
It's all about the man.
Yeah, just winning a man. It doesn't matter if he treats you badly. Like, you know, she does kind of say to Lizzie's dad, Nigel, like, what would you know about parenting? And she's right. Like, this dude does nothing.
He doesn't know anything, clearly.
No, he just thinks, oh, look, I'll comfort you, but I won't actually guide you in any way.
Yeah. I'll just be the fun-loving dad, but also not actually do any dadding.
No, and it just made me so angry. Like, in that scene where they make the big mud pie and Fred gets locked in the box, I'm just thinking, fuck you, Nigel. You're just going to walk out. You're not going to clean up this giant mess. Like, it's all left to the mom. Like, all of it is just left to the mother.
Yeah.
So I feel like she's just sort of trapped the role that society had for women at that time. You clean up the mess no matter how bad it is.
Yeah.
And then you deal with raising the next generation, no matter how difficult that is.
And that was sort of the values that were imposed onto Lizzie once Fred was sort of trapped in the box.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it was also, I guess it's also feminist in that way of that, trying to make this movie feminist.
I don't think it's feminist. It just becomes feminist despite itself.
Exactly. Because, like, Fred's a boy
Yeah.
and doing boy things, and Lizzie, that's also, like, if you look at it in that gendered way, something that her mum can't stand.
Yeah.
Because boys are allowed to be messy and gross, but girls are not.
Yes. Yeah. Girls have to be like the sweet little angels that just always look perfectly turned out.
Exactly. So when Fred gets locked away, Lizzie's the girl.
Yeah.
Lizzie's the pretty girl, and she's wearing ribbons and she's just perfectly quiet and, you know, acts the way her mum wants her to be, which is very gendered as well.
Yes.
And that's what she sort of grows up to become, but isn't a fully fleshed out person because that's what her mum wants her to be.
Yeah, yeah.
I kind of want to diagnose her mum with narcissistic personality disorder.
Yeah.
Like if she was, I mean, there's so many mums even today out there like this mum, maybe in less overt ways, less on the nose ways. You know, I feel like that Lizzie's an extension of her because she even makes her dress like her when she comes back home, which is hilarious. She's quite controlling and emotionally abusive, says cuddling is for teddy bears. So she's grown up thinking that, you know, she's not even allowed to have affection. Lizzie's grown up thinking that she can't do anything right, which leads to that quite touching scene with her and Fred. You know, Fred's the person saying, no, your mum's wrong. It's not you.
Yeah.
She's decided what her daughter needs and wants, and it's all an extension of her. You know, she couldn't keep her man, so she's going to get Lizzie to keep her man. So it's not actually about Lizzie and what she needs. It's about what her mum needs.
Yeah.
She also seems to get a sense of satisfaction for making her daughter afraid as well. Like when she locks up Fred, she's like, haha, I'm getting, like, I've destroyed
that's what'll make you cry?
Yeah, if you don't want, you know, I'll give you something to cry about.
Yeah.
Destroying the thing that she loves the most, essentially. And, like, as a parent, I cannot imagine destroying something my son loves dearly. Obviously, in this case, he's also causing so much mayhem to the family, but that sense of satisfaction. And she even says to her child, I don't love you as much as I used to. Like, that's so harmful.
Yeah, so manipulative.
She also resents her daughter for her marriage breaking up. Like, in her mind, it's Lizzie's fault. She puts that on a child. Like, it's narcissistic parenting 101, which I've read a little bit about. And kids with parents like this often go on to have mental health issues. They either can become narcissistic themselves or they become quite dependent like Lizzie is and very anxious and end up repeating the same patterns and seeking out the same sort of relationship in their life. So it can be quite detrimental. Like it's complex PTSD kind of situation. And, like, even as an adult, she's, like, locked in her room as well.
Oh, yeah, by the evil nurse. Yeah. Her perfect... It's just like this model house.
Yes.
Where nothing is out of place.
Yeah, that carpet that's constantly being cleaned.
Yes.
So, and that, yeah, like she's not, her mum never made room for an actual child in her life. It might have been that having a kid was just what was expected of you and as a symbol of success and having a family. Yeah. And then right at the end, I quite like, even though I don't think it's very realistic, that when Lizzie leaves, she says, I think she says, I love you, or she gives her mum a hug.
Yeah, she does something to kind of like reach out to her mum emotionally.
And like it's like she doesn't blame her mum.
Yeah.
And she doesn't want to have hard feelings for mum, but she's leaving. Yeah. It's like a very healthy boundary that she's putting in there, which is a nice way to show that. And then her mum's like, don't go, I'll be lonely.
Yes.
Like she shows a little bit of her trauma herself and her repressed emotions that she's been dealing with, which has led her to being the way she is. Yeah. And then Lizzie says, why don't you go have you need to find a friend, which is a very like touching end. Again, probably very unrealistic, but yeah, I like that. What did you think about it?
You know, I think sometimes when you grow up with a shitty parent, you do reach a point where you become compassionate for them because you realise that they just didn't have the coping skills to be a parent because they didn't have the nurturing themselves. So, you know, it's going to be quite difficult for them, especially if they haven't done if they have no self-awareness.
Yes.
You do kind of see, well, you know, how can this person parent me when they're so at odds with themselves? And yeah, it's quite, you know, it is really lovely. Like, it's also kind of, I suppose, a sign of Lizzie's maturity as well, where she's not like kind of fighting against her mom. She's just like kind of accepting her.
Yeah. I guess it's a good message too, if you've had this experience with your parent or parents, that the answer isn't blame and resentment. Yeah. It's acceptance and understanding and also compassion.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is summarised in a very short part of the film and, again, might take years to achieve that. It's juxtaposed with her mum's resentment of Lizzie throughout her life, the outcome of which was quite unhelpful. I just want to touch on the psychiatrist and imaginary friend disorder very quickly. Doesn't exist. I think everyone knows that. Don't love the fact that, you know, he just immediately, Lizzie doesn't actually talk through anything psychological.
We don't see any of that.
There's no real conversation at all, and he just prescribes the pills.
He has like a longer conversation with the mum behind closed doors than he does with Lizzie.
Which is inappropriate, not just for an adult, but for a kid. Obviously, when I saw kids, I would talk to the parents separately from the child, but I'd also talk to the child about what was happening. It wasn't in disrespect of the child, but there's some things you can't talk about with the child in the room, obviously, like the mum's background and things like that. So it was more getting a sense of what's going on for the family. And, you know, that's how he was treating an adult. So I'm assuming it's even worse for when you're a kid. Like, it was the early 90s, but there was no recommendation of her to actually talk to someone. It was just take the pills, which is a very medical model of its time, but just hasn't aged very well. And I'm just also curious where they were going with, like, all these kids with all these imaginary friends. Do they all have terrible parents?
Oh, yeah. It was a really cute scene, like seeing all of the imaginary friends.
Yeah.
But maybe less about having terrible parents and more about the parents being afraid of their child's imagination.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because,
or just their child having a separate life to them, like to their parent.
Yeah, and being autonomous outside of what the parent wants, which I think is a common fear. Like, when you have a kid, you want what's best for them, and you might want to have them to have a certain kind of life, but as they grow up, they become more independent, and that's a struggle for parents to accept that they aren't you, and they're going to have this whole life outside of you.
Yeah. Well, how have you found, like, you know, you're a mum, like, how have you found kind of Casper breaking away from you?
he's still pretty clingy, to be honest. I haven't had to deal with it yet. But it does, like, you know, he's becoming more independent with, like, toileting and making friends and stuff. And I'm stoked for him when he makes those steps of independence. It's hard for me to acknowledge and recognise that one day he's going to have a fight with me and tell me that he hates me. Like, I know that's coming one day, you know, which I just can't imagine now. But, like, I've seen other parents struggle for their kids to be independent and hold them back. Yeah. And I'm just very conscious of that. Like, I know I'm going to have those feelings, and I know Michael, my husband, will have those feelings too. But I think we're self-aware enough that we'll recognise it and say, hang on, we've got to let them fly.
Yeah. Yeah, because so many people, their identity is, I'm a parent.
Yes.
And that's I'm a parent, full stop.
That's my one and only achievement, or that's what I value. Yeah.
Because then you don't have an independent person. You just have a limb.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a really damaging thing to do to a child. And you just think, why did you have kids?
Yeah. And, you know, some people do have kids for their own sort of companionship. Like, it makes sense. You want someone to look after you when you're old as well, and be able to, you know, make sure they're there for you.
Yeah.
Ideally, what you want your kids to do is thrive and have a life independent of you, because that's what you're there for. But that's sometimes hard to reconcile. Not
being a parent, I don't know, but but yeah, I can definitely. I mean, it's a lot. Like, parenting is so. I think about it a lot.
It's hard.
Yes. Yeah. For so many reasons. I just want terrible people to stop having children, basically. So, yeah.
Well, at least try not to be terrible. Because I think it's also important to recognise that there is no perfect parent. There's no perfect parenting.
Yeah.
You can make mistakes. I've made many mistakes, some yesterday that I'm still, like, feeling guilty about.
Oh, no.
But it's not about the mistake. It's about the recovery from the mistake. Yeah. Like, we will fuck up so many times, but it's recognising I fucked up. Let's repair, let's heal from this and turn it into a learning experience of, you know, sometimes adults can do the wrong thing and this is how I'm going to deal with it, and maybe next time, this is how I'll deal with it next time so that it doesn't happen again, or whatever it might be. Yeah. And it's okay to feel emotions, and it's okay for things not to go right all the time.
Yeah.
Because that's still an important lesson for kids as well. Parents who want to be perfect don't want to show any of that emotion or make any mistakes around the kids, which then backfires as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess it just seems like, you know, you need infinite reserves of patience to be a parent.
But it's okay to lose patience as well, because we're also modelling to kids that I also don't have it all this energy and calmness. So I'm going to need to take a moment as well. Yeah. We're modelling that to our kids as well. So that's what I tell myself when I lose patience anyway.
Well, I mean, because you're dealing with someone who has, like, they think the world just revolves around them.
Exactly, yeah.
And they don't have any they haven't learnt self-control in any way.
They're still learning feelings and don't know what to do with them yet.
And you're battling with someone else's will, you know, and maybe sometimes you'll get a child who's okay with compromising, and then, you know, you'll get another child who is like, nope, I will destroy you.
So, it's also about being flexible as well with your approach, which, again, parents can struggle with, because this is what my first child did. Why isn't it working for my second child? Because they're a completely different person.
Yeah, kids.
Kids. I feel like we covered a lot of the psychological aspect of the film.
Yeah.
Were there any stereotypes that we saw in the film that maybe we didn't like, or anything that subverted the stereotypes, apart from what we kind of already mentioned?
I mean, in so many ways, they're all archetypes.
Yes, hugely.
I kind of feel like they're all archetypes, but they all, except for the mother, you know, like, Fred's such a slippery character.
Yeah.
I will say, you know, for Janie, I think she can kind of do better than the guy she's... Sorry, I'm just... That kind of just came into my head. I'm like, she's only seeing him like one night a month.
But he can go all night.
Yeah, he makes up
None of
for
us knew what that meant when we were kids.
No. It's kind of funny how you learn about sex just from like the most random comments that adults will make. And then you hear it enough and then you realise, oh, that's what that means.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
I was talking about this the other day. Like, Grease was my favourite movie when I was like 5. There's so many sexual references. And rapey references.
Like, Rizzo was always a character that really, I didn't get her. Like, I didn't get why she was so controversial.
Yeah, same. Like, why are they all mad at her?
Yeah.
Why is she cranky?
Yeah.
What does skip a period mean? Did she finish? She didn't
I
go to
know,
that class at school?
Yeah. And then as you get older, you're like, oh, she's the slut and we're all meant to hate her.
Yeah, we're also meant to look down at her.
Yeah.
Great song, Worst Things I Could Do. Anyway.
Yeah.
But, like, I guess Janie's kind of subverting the friend stereotype because she's quite powerful and strong.
Very independent woman.
Yeah, but she deserves maybe a hotter guy.
I think so, yeah. Someone who will always be there.
Yeah, not just every month.
Yeah, once a month.
Yeah, I didn't love that with Fred, he's a perv.
What the fuck was that about?
Like, why is he looking up everybody's skirts?
I could not. I was just so... And he's, like, he doesn't just steal a quick glance. Like, there's this one scene where the woman he's having an affair with is not wearing any underwear. And Fred, like, scoots under her dress and then just sits there staring at...
And says, like, no panties. Or
and then, like, he loses his mind and he just sits there in, like, this dreamlike state staring at her fanny. And I'm just like, that left me speechless.
It's quite disgusting.
Yeah.
And if he's supposed to be like her childhood fun self,
I know. It's like, what
5-year-old or 6-year-old does that?
Yeah, it's like, oh, hi, this is my imaginary
problematic.
Friend. He's going to stare up your skirt for a while. Don't mind him. It's just what he does. Like,
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, that was like,
Yeah. Like, if kids do that, there's a problem.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just thought that was a bit gross and unnecessary.
Yeah.
But again, 90s gross out humour.
Yeah. You know, women are there to be stared at.
Yeah,
so,
they're just objects.
Yeah.
I think that just, very stereotyped representation of therapy and the medical field, like the nurse being this
I know.
big buxom woman, which was supposed to be kind of played for, like, she looks mean and ugly, so we're supposed to dislike her.
Yeah. Again, like a villain based only on appearance.
And also she's a nurse, so their nurses are fantastic. We should appreciate nurses.
Yeah.
But maybe in the 90s they didn't as much as we should.
I was just going to say, I will stand up for Elizabeth's fashion choices.
Yeah. I do love the purple dress.
Yes, I love the purple dress as well. And I love all the other cute stuff that she wears. So
I mean, some of that's kind of coming back around in fashion too. So
yeah, that's the thing.
Slay girl.
Yeah.
And I guess I already said this, but I love that Lizzie's a little girl who's causing the problems. Like, that's a bit of a subversion of what we always saw as the ratbag boy kid.
Yeah.
And we do love and root for her, even though she's a ratbag.
Yeah. Even though Fred is just fucked.
Yes.
Yeah.
Imagine doing therapy.
Yeah.
I guess the last question is this film more helpful or harmful? What is helpful about it and what is harmful about it?
I think there's so much that's harmful about it. I think I suppose what's helpful is that it is kind of shining a light on an area that doesn't really get delved into deeply. It's kind of looking at Lizzie in a really, I want to say, non-judgmental way.
Yeah.
But is it? Like, I
don't know. It's funny because, like, she's the heroine.
The film is on her side.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it is.
Yeah.
But there's definitely times where we're, like, you know, when Fred is up to mischief and she looks, quote-unquote, crazy, which is used multiple times in the film, you know, we're supposed to be like, ugh, she's lost it. Like, it's almost a little bit against her.
Yeah, but you really empathise with her.
Yeah, hugely.
And you no one likes Charles. Like, he's such a terrible person. I suppose he's one of the characters that is unambiguously bad.
Yes, yeah.
And I do think, like, mother-daughter relationships You don't see them a lot
No.
in movies. It's definitely like the
Especially
father,
not
son.
at that time.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's helpful in that it is looking at a woman really struggling with herself, to accept herself, and also examining a really unhealthy relationship between mother and daughter.
Yeah. And I think it's got a good message, really, in the film, in that, you know, Fred does encourage destruction, but he also encourages Lizzie to think and live outside the box and be more true to herself as well, and experiencing the joy that is there, and being confident. And I guess in the dream sequence, facing her fears and embracing and loving and trusting herself is really what she learns from that.
A message for all, really.
A message for all, yes. And I guess, like, reading a lot about this, there were so many people, particularly, like, you know, on the news sites, millennials? Am I a millennial? I don't know. Gen Y.
I think you're a millennial. Well, see, Gen Y became millennials.
Yeah.
It felt like Gen Y was just like this tiny little blip, and then all of a sudden people were just calling Gen Y millennials.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, people like myself have gone, why did we watch this movie a lot? Yeah. But actually I loved it as a kid. Why did I love it so much? And then exploring the themes in it now. And so many kids loved this film. Like, there was one article where they're like, every time we went to the video shop, that's what I would come back with. Then everyone was like, oh, God, this one again.
Well, see, it was definitely a movie that I had fond memories of.
Yeah, same.
Like, there are lots of movies I saw as a child where I was just like, ugh, you know, like, I don't care about that movie. I didn't really enjoy it. But in my memories, I always liked this movie.
Yeah. And I wonder if, like, this person who wrote about it was like, I also had a traumatic childhood.
Well, that's it.
And my mum was kind of like, or my dad was kind of like her mum. And now, why didn't I pick up on that before? But maybe that's why I was drawn to it. I got to escape with Fred every day.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something that resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, because it is kind of a bit covert in the sense of it's not a very obvious movie about childhood trauma. Like, it's presented as this very kind of fun, zany movie when it's like dealing with some very deep issues. Very few films do that, where a kid can maybe watch this movie comfortably and go, wow, my parents are totally fucked too.
Yeah. And I guess it starts off with us thinking Fred's the problem.
Yes.
But it turns out, no, Fred's actually the solution to
he's
another
the problem.
He's still the problem. But it's also...
Yeah. He's like, he is a good guy ultimately.
Yeah. And it's turning the destruction that is sometimes used to deal with the problem into something more healthy, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'm sure as kids, no one was thinking it that deeply through, but obviously it resonated with us as adults. So it sort of got into us early, and then we grew up going, oh, that was wrong, sort of thing. So I think that it could have done some actual help for our generation, perhaps. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. I'm trying to think of movies that weren't helpful, but nothing's coming to mind.
Like, of that time?
Yeah, but I can't think of anything.
Well, Grease, as I mentioned before, definitely had some very unhelpful things in it.
Yeah,
like, you should completely change your look and lifestyle to impress the boy.
Yeah, to win him over.
And also, sluts are bad.
Yeah.
So I guess there is definitely some harmful things in it still.
Yes.
What do you think is harmful?
Oh, my God, just like the way it views women.
Yeah, hugely.
The way... I think that is it. Like, it has a really... You know, it's disparaging of girls. It's about women, and there's lots of women in this movie. But it does have that very old-fashioned view of women.
Yeah, hugely.
Yeah. So I think that is probably the most... And, like, the guys get just, you know, apart from Charles, like, the dad just gets let off the hook.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's very geared towards mums being the problem. Yeah. When actually more likely that when you look at actual DV statistics, it's usually the dad. But anyway, yeah, I guess of its time, it was considered very bad, like it flopped. But it's obviously become a bit of a cult film. Apparently, Rik Mayall said that mums complained that I had corrupted their sons and taught them to wipe bogies on the furniture.
I think girls were doing that too.
I'm sure they were.
Yeah.
So I guess there's an element there that apparently, according to, you know, the main star in it, that it did get some flack for encouraging kids to act out, which I don't know. I think
I don't know.
there was probably lots of reasons why kids were acting out.
Overblown to blame this movie.
100%. Yeah, you can't blame this movie.
No.
And like we said before, there's quite a few articles that were like, yes, he's eventually helping Lizzie, but the behaviour is quite extreme. Like, what part of, this was from Looper, what part of childhood innocence and identity is served by playing burglar and breaking the windows of the house? Especially when it scares Lizzie's parents so much that they call the police. Like,
Yeah. He is very extreme.
Yeah. But I also think that, like, often the most traumatised kids do exhibit the most extreme behaviour. Like, these are the kids that need a lot of support, who end up, you know, there's child protection influence, or, you know, end up with behaviour labels that often that I've worked with that really just have needs that have never been met and have no other way to cope with them.
Yeah.
You know, coping strategies for trauma are often unhealthy ones. Like, that's why it's trauma. So I think...
Trauma doesn't make you a better person.
No. God, no. You know, kids develop unhealthy coping strategies because that's how it kind of works, and that's how it's worked for them, even if they... objectively, we don't think it's helpful.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to give the movie a pass for showing such extreme behaviour, because to me, like, yeah, I've had kids that I've worked with that have been very violent towards their parents, you know, worse than what Lizzie does. So it's kind of realistic almost, even though this is a very unrealistic movie.
You know, I guess that's a good thing. So, yeah, it's kind of showing trauma in its ugliness.
Yeah. Because we still want the best for Lizzie.
Yeah.
We have positive regard for Lizzie.
Yes. Yeah.
Even though she, as Fred or as herself, has done some pretty awful things.
Yeah. But I suppose she's never actually malicious towards anyone.
She doesn't mean to be, yeah.
Yeah, she does attack the violinist.
But she thinks it's Fred. But she does say to her dad, and she says to, like, it is pretty awful to hear her say to Fred, like, let's chop Mummy's head off.
I know. Like, throw her out the window. Yeah.
And things like that. But, you know, kids will say those things. They might not necessarily mean them, but it was like grappling for control, or something that made her feel better and feel in control, just imagining being able to escape, even though it's pretty disgusting, the things they're sort of talking about.
She's just a kid.
She's just a kid, exactly. So, yeah, I don't know. Do you think it's more helpful or more harmful?
More helpful.
Yeah, I think so too, which is not the answer that I was going to come
to. No, I definitely didn't think I would. Yeah, I think because it looks at something that's rarely looked at, I'm like, yeah, this, you know, it's more helpful.
Like, I don't think I would show it to a client in a therapy session.
No.
But, you know, it could be useful in processing your own experiences. We might go through the final scores for our categories.
All right.
So the first one being lived experience, which I don't think we've got enough information to really even give a point.
No. And I feel like from the information that we have, the one person who has like the most experience with mental illness was actually the most put together character, which is Jamie, played by Carrie Fisher.
Yeah,
in
definitely.
The movie.
So it doesn't quite count.
No.
There's not enough on the internet about the person who created it, who directed it, and who wrote it as well. Accuracy.
I think some things are really accurate, like the way Lizzie is just like totally just has no sort of I don't like, you know, to say this person has no self-respect. It's very harsh, but it's just like she just has no sense of self.
No.
I think in one way that is really accurate, and the way that she's kind of like pining for the love of this man who's just a fuckwit is just, I think that's really accurate.
Yeah, I think a lot of people could see themselves in that. Some of us, not all of us, but many of us have been there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of it isn't accurate. Imaginary friend disorder isn't a thing, and, you know, the psychiatrist, the way he interacts isn't particularly accurate. For its time, maybe it is a little bit more accurate than it would be now, but there's definitely lots of embellishments and it's over the top, obviously.
Yeah.
So I don't want to give it a full point, but maybe half a point. Would you agree with that?
I think half a point is good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then stereotypes.
Oh, the mum is so stereotyped.
Yeah.
And so is the dad. Well, I mean, like so many dads actually do act like that.
Yeah.
So it's not a stereotype, but
it's also a stereotype for the dad to not
Yes.
get any recourse for being a shithead.
Yeah, exactly.
And that just being accepted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's probably too many stereotypes to give it a point.
Yeah.
And lastly, helpful or harmful.
Helpful.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Well done, Drop Dead Fred.
I never thought we'd reach that conclusion.
No,
but we have.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
And I have to let listeners know, if you want to hear more about people talking about Drop Dead Fred, there's a podcast called Should They Watch It, which is about kids' films and movies. They're from the US and they're wonderful. And they go through different movies and TV shows. And they also did Drop Dead Fred recently. And it's a really good chat.
Oh, what did they say that people should watch it? Or
I think they had some mixed feelings about it. I'll let people listen. They've done all those sort of childhood films that we watched, like Ace Ventura and I can't remember what else, but yeah.
Ace Ventura is a movie I would not want to see again.
No.
I don't think I want to see any Jim Carrey film as an adult.
And that's the thing that I actually read, is that Jim Carrey was given like so much praise for being that sort of silly person. Like a lot of people hated this film, Drop Dead Fred, but loved The Mask.
Yeah.
And like to me, Jim Carrey in The Mask is much more detestable than Drop Dead Fred.
Oh, well, I haven't seen it since it came out. I don't want to see it again.
Don't.
But I suppose, Rik Mayall has like an edge.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, Fred is so spiky.
Yeah.
That I can kind of see how Jim Carrey would be more palatable.
Yeah, so much more annoying to me, but anyway. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
It's okay.
Thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. So
it was a delight.
Oh, thank you.
This podcast is not designed to be therapeutic, prescriptive, or constitute a formal diagnosis for any listener. For a longer version of this disclaimer, please check the episode notes on your podcast app.